Welcome to So You Want to Be an Ally. We share our stories
and our insights on non-Black allyship to Black women.
My name is Darlene. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I help parents advocate for their Black and brown kids' emotional and racial identity development needs. And that's because our kids deserve the opportunity to grow, learn, strive, and thrive.
My name is Olanike. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And my life experience led me to becoming an advocate for equity in the workplace, which led me to starting a consulting business where I help workplaces who want to do better. Want to be an ally? Gather round
and listen up. All right, welcome back to So You Want to Be an Ally. We have in attendance myself, Darlene, and Olanike. And today we are going to be digging in our question number 2. When should allyship show up? So, Nikay, why don't you take us into today's podcast? When should allyship show up?
I kind of want to say all the time.
Good luck with that.
Because it can feel like, I want to say all of the time because it can feel like that's the answer is anytime that I feel like I or other Black women or other Black people are somehow like exposed to some kind of threat. Mm-hmm. That's when allyship should show up.
Right.
And it really feels like we're under some sort of threat or fearful of some sort of threat, even when we're sitting in our own homes, minding our business, right? So there is an opportunity, I would say, for anyone who considers themselves an ally or wants to be an ally, to really start to pay attention in whatever spaces they're in. There's an opportunity to potentially be an ally. And you may have somebody in that room with you or in that space with you that is creating, not creating, but their presence is creating a situation of some sort that gives you the opportunity to show up as an ally.
Right.
Or they may not even be in that space. It may be a space that is, for example, all white, and you're noticing that there's conversation or discussions that are being had without the perspective of some group that's represented. And that's an opportunity for you to be an ally as well. So, if we're talking about in the United States of this America,
that's fire.
It is like all the time.
Right. And let me be clear. So, because I'm going to kind of, for clarification, throw back or reflect back to you what you said. So earlier, obviously, you said all the time, and I had this reaction or response like, yeah, right. And I will be transparent and say that's because I know that allies can't be everywhere that we are. And so we're not looking for this saviorism. We're not looking for a cape. So that was kind of my reaction and my response, like, good luck with that. They can't be everywhere with us. Nope. But I also wanted to speak to the This America you pointed out, is that there's just so much going on right now that, part of allyship is just kind of carrying a burden with us, as we talked about in our last segment. But you do make an excellent distinction, and there are spaces where, you might come to the support, not the aid and not the savior, but be in a space of support as in a comrade, as I think you talked about before.
Yeah.
When you're noticing that a person of color or a Black woman is experiencing that level of distress that you just described, but then also in those spaces. So obviously that's one space. And then there's also the space where there are no people of color. And you often hear the story of Thanksgiving. A lot of allies that I've come to know have always processed that experience of like what the holidays are like, and everybody got that aunt or uncle or grandpa or whatever, right? So then that kind of reminds me of what you were talking about in that second example you gave. So what would you say, or could you say to the people who are, when they first hear, all the time, they're like, you asking a lot, lady. What could you say to them?
Yeah, I would say that if you're just at the early part of this journey, that is a lot to ask, because you're still learning what all these things that you don't already know, right? That's assuming that you're at the early part of your journey. I was talking to a friend of mine. A friend of mine texted me in a group text earlier today and said that she was talking to a woman who was like in her mid 40s, grew up in a smaller city in North Carolina, and had no clue, like wasn't aware of Jim Crow, the Jim Crow era, Jim Crow laws.
Wow.
Like literally did not know. Had to go Google and look up what Jim Crow meant and what it was. And it blows my mind
that even now,
somebody that is in their mid 40s grew up in this America, in these United States of this America, and had no clue what that was.
Wow.
So it makes me want to be more careful with my language. Like, yeah, that lady can't be an ally all the time right now. She has a lot of homework and a lot of learning to go do first before she can be meaningfully impactful to anyone. But it seems like this is maybe the beginning of that a journey for her. This is somebody that, you know, I probably wouldn't have the tolerance or the like ability to like sit with and walk through things, because I think a lot about like psychological safety, and it's only become more present for me in the last couple of years. Like I had to make intentional, and I'm continuing to make intentional decisions about what mindsets and like philosophical positions that I expose myself to. And it's interesting because I do this for work. Like I go and present and facilitate conversations about equity issues in the workplace. But I am, even in those settings, I'm a lot more open, because I'm taking, like with this podcast, I'm taking the stance of I've prepared myself to be in a place to be able to respond to things and address things. But in my daily life, I'm intentionally protecting my psychological safety all of the time. So if we're Facebook friends and you want to engage me in a conversation about race and you're in denial about that, you know, like racism even exists, I can't have a conversation with you. Because on a psychological level, I am not safe in that conversation, and I'm not safe with you. And I'm not in a position where I'm being, you know, I've been asked and I've agreed to come and teach or train.
That's right.
So yeah, I would definitely say for some people, the all of the time answer is not probably the answer that you should run with. But I think you should be thinking about it all of the time. You should be looking for an opportunity to do so, to be an ally, if that is what you have decided you want to do.
One of the things you and I talked about, as we're getting or linking this to the question of when should it happen, I find that your friend, whoever texted you about that person, I don't know if that friend was someone you consider an ally or another Black person, but even thinking about what you just described about the onus that, or the weight that is often put on us as Black people to educate white people, like that would be a great place to be an ally. So, you know, Susie Q has no idea, or as I joked with Nikkei earlier about Karens coming out with their posters during the protest, like some Karens are waking up, they're realizing that they might be some Karens. So that's a perfect place for when allyship should show up, because allyship does not necessarily always have to be next to a Black person. And if you're finding yourself where that's when it's showing up for you, then you want to do some work around that as well. Because part of the conversation that we'll get into later is around the motivators. So we ask, when should it show up? Well, we have to ask about the motivators for when it shows up, right? Because you're going to be motivated by various things that trigger you to show up and take on the role and identity of an ally. And those motivators behind that are going to really inform how you behave in those spaces, right? So, you know, if you're motivated to kind of deal with your guilt and your anxiety, and you're all of a sudden like, oh my God, I need to fix what has happened for the last 400 years. That's going to be different than, say, the Karen who realized that, you know, she might have misstepped a couple times at work. And she's like, I made some errors. How do I correct this? Because if you even listen to it, one's more of a reflective thing and one's more of an action-oriented thing. So I might be getting a little too deep and pretty much outside of the scope of this. And this may need to be a whole nother segment, but it really goes to this idea of that onus can go on another ally, like taking the ownership away from the Black woman to have to explain and describe. As an ally, you can easily step into that role. And I know
Right.
I would be happy to have a list of people I can send your way because I'm tired of talking to them. So if we're talking about when it should show up, that would be a great plan.
That's a great place. Like, be the person that's like, okay, I'll be the person to talk to my fellow white people, or even my fellow Asian people, my fellow Indian, like non-Black person when it comes to Black anti-Black racism and Black issues. Yeah, the psychological safety piece is really, really important. And as a Black woman in America, I've learned to live with anti-Black racism. You learn to function with it.
Yeah.
But at times like these, so we are recording and having this conversation at a time where the world is paying attention to what is going on in the United States as far as the protesting and the demonstrations for change in our policing and in our criminal justice system. It's everywhere right now. Everyone is looking for ways to be an ally. Everyone is asking questions. People are sharing articles. We are sharing articles and resources to help people understand and learn more about what is the history here? What is the long-term, centuries-long history that has brought us to where we are today? And what can you do about it? So it can be overwhelming, but being an ally and going further, not just being an ally with your words, because I think there's a difference with saying, I care and I stand with you, and there's that. And then there's like, I will carry this weight with you. I am going to fight this fight as though it is my fight as well, not just because I care about you, but because I see how this impacts all of us, right? So I think any opportunity that you are aware of where you see that there's an opportunity for you to help make space for Black people, amplify the voices of Black people, challenge whatever narrative is happening that may be dehumanizing Black people, whatever things or actions are actually taking place that are dehumanizing to Black people. Whenever that's happening in your presence, that is an opportunity for you to show up with your allyship.
Absolutely. And I like how you brought back up the psychological safety, because that's not something that's visible in the same way we understand mental health and mental health diagnoses and mental illness. This often, this weight of things unseen, right? So, we as a people, and you know this, Olanike, we as a people, we will put on a grin, we will smile, we will push through, because we're often taught from a very young age, you don't let them see you cry, you don't let them see you sweat. But I've also seen a number of posts go around through social media saying, hey, your Black friends are not okay. They are smiling, they're going to work, but they are not okay. And that's because it's just been this onset of just constant, it's like a never ending cycle. And the moment we feel like we've made progress, again, we're reminded of how little progress we've made. And so that psychological safety becomes one of the things that often goes unseen from our allies. And so going back to, when should you step up, that's absolutely it. It does become all the time, because we have incidents that happen, but to hear during this podcast that this is something we deal with all the time, even though when no one's protesting, even when no one has recently been shot, like, I said recently been shot. It is always going on. It continues to go on. You don't have to look very far to find an example of just overt racism where somebody's being called a nigger, or just covert racism where they tell you they don't see color. Color blindness is one of the things, right?
Or they're surprised that you did something smart.
Yeah, or amazing.
Oh, you did that?
Right.
Whoa, you sound really surprised. What is that about?
Of course, when you said that earlier, like all the time, that's because you and I know that is always occurring at every level. And while you acknowledge that it's not something that, that's an unrealistic expectation to have the new person who walked into this area of wanting to be anti-racist to have that, to take action all the time. You can absolutely take a reflective stance on your life to see what you're contributing and what you're doing about your day-to-day interactions, your day-to-day beliefs, your day-to-day reactions and responses.
And I would call that action. So I think that,
absolutely.
Right? So
Yeah.
a lot of people that are wanting to now do something to support, skip over the step, often the step where you learn and you read and you listen and you observe and you absorb information and figure out what is the role that you can actually play. They skip all of that and they want to go immediately to action. And with protests and marching, and there's kind of accessible action, I guess I would call it. You can go and walk, you can go and march, you can go and protest, but eventually it dies down, right? And then what are you doing?
Yep.
So this is a long game, like we said, centuries and centuries and centuries long. So the learning and the inner work that we want you to do, that we're encouraging you to do, is action. And when you actually get to the point where you're ready to take action in that workplace meeting or in that, your place of worship or your kid's school or whatever it might be, the action, well, I think we'll talk about this in a future episode, but the action doesn't mean centering yourself or centering your voice.
Yes.
Right? So, but we'll get into that later. But learning, taking the time to do your homework is action. It's the point that I wanted to make there.
And you hit it home. Because just like you said, everybody is up in their movement, they're moving, and we acknowledge the allies, those who are able to recognize their privilege and who are using their privilege to raise the voices of Black people, at the cost of being arrested, at the cost of being shot by a bullet, at the cost of being ran over by a cop car. We see you, you're out there, we see it. And we appreciate that. And we also want to lift up those who aren't able, for whatever reason, whether it be your career, because we don't want to lose people. We need you in the right spaces. We want you to use your privilege. So we need you to stay in your spaces. Your job, your own abilities, your own crosses that you're bearing, right? This idea that this sacrifice, we recognize that there are things in place that will limit your ability to take action as everybody else or people typically see it. But the internal work that you do, the reflecting of, what kind of messages or what am I reiterating or what am I perpetuating? All of that is real work. That's the hard work that most people like to avoid, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't want to deal with that. They'll give me a sign. To go protest. Yes. Give me a sign.
It's real easy to show up and go protest and put up a sign and then go back to regular life. And never think about it again.
Yep. But that processing through that guilt, that shame for things that you were not a part of, but things that you get privilege from, all of that is real work. That's hard work. So, your willingness to do that, to open that door, that to me, as Nikkei has pointed out, that is how it shows up as well, right? That's when it should show up. When you are sitting with yourself and deciding on your day, and you have people that you interact with, or if you're sitting in a place of privilege, and you have power, because power is the dynamic that we know white supremacy does not offer Black people in certain realms. So if you have that privilege of power, we don't have to see that. That's when it should show up for sure.
There is a picture that you may have seen, Darlene. I want to say it was in Louisville, but I'm not sure. But it was a protest for the killing, the police killing of George Floyd, and there was a row of white women, I think it was, holding hands in between the protesters and the police that were in full riot gear. Let's go take this, down. And that picture gave me chills because talk about a picture being worth 1,000 words. Because I have never seen in my lifetime or in history
ever.
A group of white women protesting, getting shot with rubber bullets, getting hosed down, dogs being set on them, getting tear gas. So for this group to have that, I don't even know what the story is. I've seen the picture and the headlines, to be honest. I haven't read the details. I don't know if it was a planned thing or if they just showed up. But that visual is so powerful.
Yes.
Like that is exactly what Darlene was just talking about, right? Like that is leveraging your privilege, right? And your power. That's an example of using that to support the oppressed, the marginalized, in this case, the protesters.
Yes.
Because it is very easy for police forces to turn. I mean, they've been doing it on Black people for decades, centuries. Seeing our pain, seeing our struggles, seeing us, shot down is, people are, to a large degree, immune to that. But if you remove all of that and you put this row of white women in place, that's an image that's like, makes you think.
Yep.
Like you would never visualize, you would never imagine, a scenario where white women were protesting and that was happening. We know that from a month ago when people were in front of courthouses or whatever, yelling with a gun, armed men with guns, yelling and coughing on policemen, and nothing happened to them. So that picture was like so powerful. So I was like, yes, it's an example of allyship in action.
Yes, and that's to me, that's the culmination of it all, right? There had to be some level of willingness to be vulnerable, like they had to acknowledge so this is the thing, and I've had conversations about white women all the time. I've actually purchased a book that I'll reference a little bit later, but white women have very unique privileges, and there are a lot of, and I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir here with you, and even of our listeners who've maybe taken a glance or read the book White Fragility. There's another book called Antagonists, Advocates, and Allies. White women have a very unique privilege and power that over the time they've tapped into. And so those white women had to know and have an awareness that I can link up arm to arm all my whiteness as a white woman, and ain't nothing gonna happen to me. Right. In the same way that the woman at the park. Right?
Exactly.
Right.
She knew her power.
Exactly.
She knew her privilege.
Yes.
And she weaponized it.
Yes.
Against,
That is the difference. So there is something beautiful about the contrast between those two.
Yeah.
Because it brings to light that while, if you want to do some research, you want to know the history, there's a whole thing about white feminism and how there are dialogues and debates about how it does or does not fit for Black women, right? So that's my pearl to you to go out and do some work. But in those places, in those spaces is when it should show up. But that's a perfect opportunity to gain awareness. A lot of people are going to hear that and feel defensive. That's your automatic response. Anytime somebody points out something that makes you vulnerable, especially when you're just now exploring and trying to figure out what's happening, you're going to be like, woo, how dare she? Well, I don't speak on anything that's not in writing. That's not my approach. This is not my opinion. There's evidence. It's not opinion at all. So
you can look it up.
I think that showing of what it means to embody and understand white privilege, and then to use it in a way that is helpful. That is where power and privilege meets to the benefit of allyship.
Yeah. That was them understanding their systemic privilege and power.
Yes.
Individually, those women may not feel like they have much power, right?
Great distinction.
But when you think about it on maybe an institutional level or a systemic level, they have power, they have privilege, not in the same sense of like, a privilege that maybe you have that you can buy or, you live in a nice neighborhood or whatever, but like they understood that their whiteness and their white womanhood, I would probably say their white womanhood would not be attacked in the same way that
at the same level
would have been.
Exactly. In the same way that we learn, and this is where the intersectionality, this is why our podcast is very unique, because we recognize the intersectionality of being a Black person and also a woman, right? And we know that there are other identities that go along with that and that inform how we are all responded to. But even comparing that example, the white women who formed the link to the white men carrying guns, right? So how would then what would have been the response to white women if they're talking about they want the right to not wear a mask? What would have been the language? What would have been right? So we acknowledge that these are real layers in this America, as Olanike pointed out. And so in doing that, we also want to lift up the added piece of our skin color, what it means to add to that layer of Black, and now how we're all thugs because we want to change policing practices that often result in the loss of our lives. It's ironic how, we have a pandemic and we move right into action because there was a thing that was increasingly taking lives. And so there are people out here today saying, hey, this is increasingly taking lives. We need to do something different.
Yeah.
And so
it's not working. As it is.
That's it. That's all we're saying.
Yeah, do something different.
That's it.
Stop killing us.
Right. That's all.
So the other thing that I learned, where we have just a few more minutes left. So I want to talk about Camden, New Jersey real quick before we shift to the consider this segment. But Camden, New Jersey is right across the river from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Philadelphia is ablaze with protesting.
Okay. Camden,
as from what I've learned, is not. Camden revamped their entire policing system like 3-4 years ago, and it's all available online. You can Google it. This is part of what I was doing yesterday when I found out, like, what is this? Camden is one of those cities where you see the police marching with the protesters.
Yeah.
I'm like, and then when I learned about the fact that they had completely revamped their policing policies like 3-4 years ago, and how they are continuing ongoing training for their officers on de-escalation methods. Like, you better be able to prove
that you tried
to keep your job, that you tried to de-escalate the situation before you used force.
Right.
But they're trained to be able to do that. There was the article that I read gave an example of a man that was like wielding a knife and threatening people, and the police showed up. Like 15 police people showed up, and they just joined hands and formed a circle around him until he calmed down.
Yeah. Wow.
Like, the response was totally different versus like 3-4 cop cars like surrounding him with their guns drawn, and now you've escalated the situation that was already escalated, right? So that's
an example.
Another example that we have other options. There are other options and other choices that we all can make. Yes, but that those in our society with power and privilege, and a systemic way,
can at least offer us suggestions. Because I think from the standpoint of a mother and a wife, I just really want people to come to the table and figure it out, right? I know that, and I'm sure those of us who are logically thinking and thinking rationally and are not coming from a space of emotion, and I understand there are people out there at various levels of this, right? There are some people who are so angry that they don't want any part of it and they just want to tear shit down. Kudos to you. And then there are people who are like, I don't want no part of this because this is out of hand and I don't see any point in trying to deal with this because it ain't going to change nothing. And then there's people who are like, probably feel all those things, but kind of taking that energy to say, okay, let's get some solutions.
Do something.
What I hear from that is not that what they're doing is going to work for everybody. What I hear from that is there are steps you can take that you can make some change. Like yours don't have to look like mine, but at least where's an effort? Can we get an effort? Can we get an effort? Can we get a task force? Because at least then you could say, I at least hear you at this point. That task force don't have to go nowhere. But at least you say, I respect the fact that I acknowledge that we ain't doing this right. We created a task force. Then those of us who, have all of those intersectional identities who like to burn stuff, but also realize it ain't gonna solve no problems, can kind of follow with the task force and say, okay, we gonna keep our thumb on the pulse of this so that we can get things moving. But to completely tell us as a community that we're thugs and we're acting out and just completely invalidating what statistics show is not the approach.
Yeah, the root cause. Yeah. The root cause is racism. Centuries-long racism. And how it continues to show up. That's it. That's the starting point. Start there. Let's start there with trying to figure out something to make it better.
Yes. Well, yeah, I know. If I sound tired, I'm tired.
Yeah, it is exhausting. It's exhausting. We didn't even talk about, I guess we can talk about from a wife perspective, like you just said, and a mother perspective, because there's a whole lot we could say. Yeah. And just unpack there.
Yeah. I feel like that's another podcast. Like, honestly.
Probably. Mm-hmm. For the consider this section, I want people to consider in whatever spaces they find themselves, how can they make space for the marginalized and unheard? I think if you would just ask yourself in any setting, scenario, room, who's marginalized here? Who's not present? Who's not being heard? And figuring out what are the ways that you can make space. That's a place to show up.
I like that one.
That's a place to show up.
And I think I'm going to go along too with, because that's kind of like a more reflective exercise. And I think I'm going to go along with that one as well, because I feel like there are a number of people, as we talked about earlier, who have stepped out of their comfort zones and, willing to physically put their bodies on display through protest. And I also feel like there are a number of people who aren't at that place yet. So I feel like what we're offering today is an opportunity. This is not, and be mindful, we're not saying to the people who are protesting, hey, don't go through this exercise, because Olanike pointed out, a lot of people like to skip this section of the allyship process. So take some time to really explore what your privileges are in the spaces you are in. And that is a very just global, ongoing process. What Olanike has asked is to examine the spaces that you find yourself in. So what Olanike has asked is for you to examine your spaces that you're in and look to find ways to create space for Black women, Black people. For me, I'm saying when you're sitting at home and you're grabbing an ice cream or you're driving down the street, because I use a lot of driving time to reflect, I want you to really explore your privilege and what it shows up as, because I feel like that's an anchoring exercise, and it really, really keeps you connected, so that when you find yourself with the ability to speak up on behalf and advocate, you are anchored. You are already anchored in kind of where you are, and that will inform what motivates you to keep pressing through, because this allyship work is not an easy thing to do. And it's easy to get mulled down and tired and all of that. But by understanding where your privilege lies, you will understand where you're drawing from. You're drawing your energy from. And so to me, that's why these two exercises can absolutely complement each other. And you choose the one you want. But know that both of these are important for your allyship journey overall. So that's what I would add as to consider this. Consider your privilege.
Yeah.
And really, really, really understand it.
And it's an evolution. You're not going to figure it out in one day or one book or one article. It's a journey.
Yep. And it will help you in those spaces when you feel that, start to learn and listen to that tug in your chest or whatever your anti-racist little bell is inside. It will give you an opportunity to know what to do in that moment. So with that, Olanike,
all right. I think that's it for today.
It's been wonderful.
Till next time.
Until next time. All right, folks, we're going to end it there for now. We want to make sure we hear from you, so send us a note or your thoughts on the question of the day. And if you want to speak to us on a topic, send it our way. You can find us on our social media platform at wannabeanally or email us at wannabeanally@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and subscribe to So You Want to Be an Ally wherever you get your personal podcasts.
You can find me, Olanike, at my website, www.mosaicforequity.com. That's Mosaic, MOSAIC, 4 as in the digit 4, equity, EQUITY. Follow me on Facebook and on LinkedIn at Mosaic for Equity. You can find me with that handle, and on Instagram as well.
You can find me, Darlene, at my website, www.parentzonellc.com. And follow me on Facebook at Donnie Davis, that's DAUNI, and Parent Zone LLC. And on Instagram at PZ Parenting Coaching. All right, we're out.
Bye.